we do know what is coming in the future because already multi-million pounds have been invested to ensure the future's creation. And this impacts all of you very directly when it comes to learning. We learn best when we learn kinetically. This is something that everybody understands. And I'm sure you've already heard that the glasses that we're all going to be wearing in 5 years' time will have a little chip in them, so there will be a little computer screen in front of our eyes. What I'm told by scientists within 10 years' time as a patent, within 15 years' time as an absolute normality, is that we're all going to have chips implanted to our fingertips, so that we will literally carry data and exciting experience in our fingertips that we can then program either onto the glasses that we wear or onto some handheld machine. But we are physically going to be the Wi-Fis. We are going to be the creatures that absorb the influence of the World Wide Web. And academia has a real challenge with this. Because if you imagine that scenario where every single human being who has the economic resource to possess one of these things can have, at the touch of a fingertip, any kind of entertainment they want, any kind of music, any kind of computer game, how is academic learning going to find a space in that extraordinarily exciting, overpacked experiential world? So what I'm going to describe to you is the ways that I think academia can deal with that challenge. In some senses, this kinetic learning is not just a kind of spectre of the future. It is actually something which is very, very ancient. Before the paper revolution, before the papyrus revolution, how people learned, of course, was only kinetically, by literally bumping into each other in the streets of Athens, by talking to one another, while shouting new ideas across the Roman Forum. So I thought it might be interesting to see, since we're about to enter an age of absolute kinetic learning, to see how those in civilization who generated an education community as civilization itself was forming, how they dealt with this. And this isn't just self-indulgent because I am a historian. I think it's actually incredibly relevant because at the birth of civilization as we recognize it in the West, and I put the birth of civilization to about 6,000 BC, but the birth of civilization as we recognize it to the 6th and 5th century BCs in the Eastern Mediterranean, those communities were actually dealing with issues very similar to the issues that we're dealing with today. These were the questions that they asked themselves. They asked themselves whether society needed abstract concepts such as wisdom, virtue, love, and morality. Were these things essential in a fully functioning human society? They asked themselves a great deal about war, about the purpose of war, because Athens, this beautiful, glittering, golden age city, was also a city that voted to go to war 1 year out of every 2. So every second year, the Athenian citizens, these great democrats, stood in the assembly, raised their hands and said, we want to embark on an aggressive military campaign. And so questions were always asked, can we do this? Is there such a thing as an ideological war? Should we go to war under the banner of democracy? And as you know, this is a question which is torturing us still today as more and more body bags come back from Afghanistan and Iraq. They also ask themselves about the place of humans in a world of diminishing resources. All those stories about the gods and seas rising up and earth swallowing men, those were all about whether the earth can survive without humans, which of course it can, but whether humans can survive within a violent and vital and brutal world, the brutal natural world. Also, most importantly, I think, in the 5th century BC, they asked themselves about the possibility of a multi-ethnic future. Because Athens, the democratic Athens, was very unusual in that it had an empire and it allowed into its city men from all sorts of different city-states and nations. So they asked themselves the question, is insularity or a multicultural future the thing which is going to give an institution and a society most strength? The man who asked this question most pertinently was Socrates. He is the master of the art of kinetic learning. So I'm just going to read you a little bit of how Socrates decided he should try to teach the next generation. This is a quote from Xenophon's Memorabilia, if there are any classicists in the room. One day, Socrates met a young man on the streets of Athens. "Where can bread be found?" asked the philosopher. The young man responded politely, "In a baker's." "And where can wine be found?" asked Socrates. With the same pleasant manner, the young man told Socrates exactly where he could get wine. "And where can the good, where can love, where can inspiration be found?" said Socrates. And then the young man was puzzled and unable to answer. "Follow me to the streets and learn," said the philosopher. Socrates was, as Cicero very famously put it, the first philosopher to bring philosophy down from the skies. He worked on the streets. He was, in a sense, a pre-echo of our future when all our students are going to be walking around in parks and public spaces and back streets with information at their fingertips. This is where Socrates thought men and women, particularly young men and women, could best learn. He asked questions about the civilized world at a time when civilization was being honed and was trying to work out how to live with itself, all of which makes him sound a little bit worthy and a little bit like a killjoy, but of course he was far from that. He was incredibly dangerous and incredibly exciting. He was so dangerous that famously, because young men and women flocked to him because they loved this direct, exciting, experiential way that he taught, because so many young men particularly came to hear him speak, he was then condemned to death by a democratic court and was forced to drink hemlock in his cell. He was, in a sense, the first ideological martyr because his method of teaching was considered so effective and so dangerous. And that's something that we should remember. As a university of the future, do we want to engage with something which has such a white heat of influence as that? Socrates wasn't, as I said, a killjoy. He wasn't somebody who was worthy. This morning we've been talking about the need for humour in society, the need for love. And although Socrates famously rejected physical love, I'm sure you all know the story. This is him here trying to tempt the beautiful Alcibiades away from the house of prostitutes because Socrates himself refused to sleep with Alcibiades. But he did have a heartfelt and passionate belief in the role of love in human relations. But his love, however, was something a bit different. These were ta erotica, the things of love. Ta erotica is a very, very difficult phrase to translate because it does mean something erotic. It does mean something which is erotically exciting, but not necessarily in a sexual way, but something that makes you delight in the world. Ta erotica inspires you to the good things. It makes your heart beat a bit faster when you wake up in the morning because you are so excited about what it is that you are going to do. This is how Socrates described the power of love, the power of ta erotica in a good, healthy society. Eros, of course, the god of love who generated ta erotica, draws insularity out of us and pours familiarity into us. He encourages and catalyses all shared gatherings like ours. He takes the lead in festivities, in sing-alongs, those habitual events that we love to attend in religious gatherings. He encourages cohesion and he dismisses extremism. His currency, and this is important, his currency, the currency of ta erotica, is sympathy. Antagonism is given no quarter. He is gracious and gentle. He is adored by the wise, admired by the gods. He is craved when absent. He is prized when present. Hedonism, luxury and sensualism, delight, desire, ambition and achievement, these are our children. These and ta erotica should be our universal guides. That's from Symposium 1971D, if you want the reference. So what Socrates is saying in essence is that we are nothing if we do not love, and the pursuit of wisdom is impossible if we do not love what we do. So how can we ensure that the learning process delivered by universities such as Maastricht can realise such passionate goals where an ancient ambition can be achieved in a very modern age? Well, I would suggest it can happen in two ways. both by embracing the storytelling techniques that Socrates demonstrated so masterfully, those passionate dialogues that he sponsored, and combining that with a cutting-edge technology that can deliver your ideas internationally, a way of making your learning thrilling to a very demanding mass global audience. Now, it's all very well to say all this, to say, this is what you should do, but there are means of realising it. I think if, as academics and students, actually, I'll tell you what I'd like to do. This evening, when you go home, set yourselves a task. This is what you have to do the whole time when you're making a television programme. You know how in documentaries, at the beginning, the presenter stands up and does this kind of oration about why their subject is interesting. It always sounds like it goes on forever and ever and ever, but actually it's normally about 45 seconds long, that description of the importance of a subject. What I'd all like you to do tonight, if you haven't had too much to drink at the lovely reception this afternoon, is to sit down in your rooms, force yourself to write a 45-second little speech that encapsulates why what you are doing is important and why it needs to be shared with the world. And I'll give you a little tip. We speak about 3 words per second. So if you just write 3 words on 45 lines, you'll know that you've got 45 seconds worth. So do that. And if you'd like to, you can Google me and email me, and I'll have a laugh reading them. But it's actually harder than you think, but it's a very, very good exercise because it makes you remember why it is that you love what you do. And this is absolutely possible for a university to do this as an institution now, because here I've got my iPhone. I'm sure everybody else in the audience has got their iPhone with them too. On my iPhone, I've got 25 4-minute applications. Why haven't I got an application from Maastricht University? There should be something here which is telling me how fantastic Maastricht is. There should be something, somebody should have sent me a classics app that is encouraging me to think about the other philosophers, not just Socrates, but Plato and Aristotle. And this is the way that a university like yours can get to a truly mass audience. This is increasingly important because the centre of gravity of civilization is shifting. So this is not something that can just happen in the Socratic face-to-face way. It is something that has to happen via technology in an international context. As you know, the world's boundaries are shifting, but so importantly are its attitudes. We all know the kind of bald facts that China and India are both rising as economic powers. But in a sense, what's important about them is not, I think, their economic output, but how they feel about themselves. China, as was admitted to me, I have to say, off the record, so I hope I'm not being indiscreet. I'm sure I'm not. You'll all keep this to yourself as a secret, I'm sure. Somebody had gone out there, a diplomat had gone out on official visit, and he said, what's interesting is that China's spend on armaments is extraordinarily high. So it's only outdone now by America in what it's spending on armaments. Nobody knows why it's doing that, whether it's doing it just because it feels it can, whether it has a greater purpose. So we have to think about how these countries think about themselves. The Middle East may well be losing its economic security, but its influence is going to increase. It's been estimated that by 2030, so by the year that we're all imagining, the University of the Future year, between 30 and 35% of the world's population will be Muslim. And that's a huge increase on what it is today. And we have to think about how, as a society, we're going to deal with that. I work with a foundation in London called the Foundation for Science, Technology and Civilization, which very, very specifically looks at how the gap between the ever-widening gap at the moment between East and West can be bridged. And so what I'd like to do is just to offer up to you very briefly a case study of how we dealt with that with the technology available to us now in 2010, and for you all to think, well, perhaps how will this be dealt with in 2030?